On behalf of the Downtown STEM Academy and STEM TV Live, we want to welcome you to a special presentation of the 9th grade International Studies Summit Finals. Today we have 8 groups of students who will be presenting their research on their particular country and resource that they've conducted during the 3rd and 4th marking period. We hope you enjoy.
Russia's oil conflict, and we're going to be talking about that for our summit presentation. So Russia's largest natural resource that makes up 70% of their total profit is oil. But since they rely so much on this one resource, their country does not know what to expect because of its instability. Not only is Russia losing money, but life as well. And if they were able to accumulate enough money to fix and strengthen their pipelines, then they would have less oil spills and detriments to their economy, the people, and the environment.
Okay, so throughout the last decade, the Russian economy has been losing value consistently due to their inconsistency in their oil industry. So throughout the past 5 years, the Eurozone has been trying to switch to alternate forms of energy. And as you can see based on the graph, the Eurozone is their main source who they provide to above like so many other different regions. So as they're trying to switch to this alternate source, their demand for oil is going down significantly. But a lot of other regions also tried to switch to alternate forms, and they found that it takes a long time to consistently switch everything because there's so many different things in their culture that they need to switch. So if this doesn't work out, which it could, their demand for oil may start going up again. But they're not. Russia is not quite there yet with their So then the next thing is the sanctions that Russia has had to face throughout the past decade. They had a territorial dispute with the Ukraine over the Crimean Peninsula because they had rich oil there. So they both wanted it, but they ended up like going past their boundaries. So they both got sanctions on who they could trade to, how they could trade. This significantly affected Russia's oil industry because they can't distributing as much oil as they have. They can't distribute it consistently. However, these sanctions are slowly becoming less and less impactful. So the Russian oil industry is going back up again. However, once again, they're not quite there yet with rebuilding. And then their final problem, their final problem is okay, their final thing that they need to cover up is, oh my God,
So Russia's oil, they have a certain process that they go through. So first they take all of their drills and equipment that they need and they put it onto an oil rig. An oil rig is where everything is put together and placed before they actually drill the oil. So when the drilling of the oil comes, they put the oil rig over top of the main boring hole where the oil will be extracted from the ground, and it is sent over through many pipelines all over Russia. There is one flaw in this process. The flaw is that the oil that they are taking out of the ground it's crude oil. So this means that it contains water and mud, which has bacteria in it, and it quickens the pace of corrosion. So all of these corroded pipelines around Russia are transporting oil, causing spills, which are affecting the Russian government because they are losing money, as well as the people and the land. So who is in charge of this oil process? There are many distributors and contractors in Russia that control like their own oil rigs and such, but the main people that take over the control is the Russian government. So they are the ones that are controlling everything that happens, and they are the ones that need to take action with their problems of the corroded pipelines. One of the biggest movements that Russia went through with was drilling in the Arctic. In 2012, they started this with cooperation with ExxonMobil, but recently in 2015, they have stopped this cooperation due to outside problems. So this has been a major flow of oil that has just been rapidly stopped. So the Russian government is losing money. And at the time when they were drilling in the Arctic, the land was also being destroyed.
Russia, this process may seem functional, however, it causes many detriments to the environment on the land, the water, and the animals that are living in both of these areas. On the land, Russia has expanded their drilling area over into the Arctic. So this expands over a larger area of land, and they are spilling into more areas, as you can see on this map. Also, once oil is spilled onto the land, there's the ability for nature to manipulate it. What that means is that the sun can shine down on it, which will cause it to have a stench, or rain could come down, it could wash into rivers and sink deeper into the land. Our solution for this is stronger pipes on the land. Why we put stronger pipes on the land would be so that there is less breakage in the pipes, which would mean less spilling. The detriment also spreads into the water. In the water, like I said, it's susceptible to manipulation of nature. And when it rains, there's a possibility that it will go into rivers. So if you look at this map, it is a river system in Russia. And if oil is spilled into the very highest part of this river, the entire river system will be affected because a river is a moving body of water, so it will carry the oil. Also in the water, it's severely impacted by the oil because the cleanliness of the oil is taken away. Also, the texture and the visual appearance is sad. Okay, so our solution for this is reinforcements on the pipes that we're going to make stronger. The reinforcements are non-corrosive agents so that the water has less of a control on how long the pipes last. Finally, animals are impacted. So when animals are covered in oil, either on land or in the water, they are forced to relocate because the land that they're living on is no longer inhabitable and can no longer sustain life. To give you an idea of how much oil is being spilled in Russia, not only that, but how many animals are being killed, I'm going to relate it to the BP Deepwater Horizon spill, which occurred in the Gulf of Mexico. So during the BP Deepwater Horizon spill, 4.8 million barrels of oil were spilled. In Russia, yearly, they spill 30 million barrels of oil into the water. The BP Deepwater Horizon spill killed or injured 82,000 birds, 6,000 sea turtles, 29,500 marine animals, and an incalculable number of fish. If I were to put this in terms of Russia for how much oil they spilled and how many animals they killed or injured, they would have killed or injured 512,500 birds, 37,000 sea turtles, 155,400 sea mammals, and an incalculable number of fish. The graph that you can see here represents the statistics that I just shared with you. The red is Russia and their spillage per year and the damage that they do to animals, and the blue is the BP Deepwater Horizon spill and the damage that they do to the animals. As you can see, the red, which occurs yearly in Russia, is significantly larger than the one event of the BP Deepwater Horizon spill. Our solution for overall is to have stronger pipelines as well as the reinforcements inside of them. This will prevent spilling in the water and on land by a significant amount. Not only is the environment injured, but also the people living in all parts of Russia.
So we know that the environment's obviously affected. So what about the people? The people are affected because the oil is coming in and they're destroying the land and they're destroying the water. And the people that are most affected by this are the natives in Russia, the native Inuits to be exact. their way of life is controlled around the environment, and they grow crops and they eat from the soil, and they fish and they eat that fish from the water. So not only does this affect people, but this also affects the government as well. So the government loses $1.49 billion a year in revenue from Russian oil spills alone. And to get this number, we calculated 30 million barrels of oil a year. 30 million barrels of oil a year they spill in the Arctic. And since a barrel costs about $50.99, it totals up to, again, around $1.49 billion. So how can combine this with the fact that there is a global crisis with oil, and Russia has a real problem, and we present a solution with the pipes. So the pipes, okay, what we want to do with the pipes is replace each pipe individually for 6,000 miles. This project will take 9.5 years and cost about $200 million. From this, Russia will gain $1.2 billion in revenue after it's completed. But yeah.
Okay, overall, creating stronger pipes will benefit so many different aspects of the Russian culture. So first, it'll bring consistency to the economy. If we're able to strengthen the pipes, we can start and have a constant revenue that will come in. We'll be able to strengthen different relationships and have the oil industry consistent, which will let us build like our other industries such as coal and alcohol and different beverages. And then next, if we are able to strengthen the pipelines, this will help the environment in so many different ways, because without there would be a significantly less spills, so it would be a number of spills that we would be able to manage, and having less spills, brings like a better view towards Russia, so they will be able to build better relationships with other countries. And finally, if we are able to strengthen these pipelines, it will help the drilling process significantly, because with stronger pipes, again, less spills, we would be able to have less workers that can consistently work and put them in a safer environment. So in conclusion, if we strengthen these pipelines, it will bring so many benefits to the whole Russian culture.
Thank you.
Would you rather choose dirty water or expensive clean water? I think it's safe to say that most of us would choose the clean water. However, Mexican citizens are posed with this question every day, as their options for water are the dirty tap water that comes to their homes or expensive bottled water. However, many of them can only afford the dirty tap water, and they're forced to use this water that has many health problems to bathe with, clean themselves with, cook with, and brush their teeth with. This is a main problem. This is a very big problem in Mexico, and it has many effects on the people.
The water crisis in Mexico has a large negative impact on the economy, environment, and the people that live there. The water crisis in Mexico consists of disgusting tap water and rusty and leaking pipes.
The current tap water in Mexico is bad and really unable to drink, and drinking it can cause multiple health problems. And this is why the Mexican people are forced to purchase the water from private businesses that sell clean bottled water instead of drinking the tap water they receive into their homes.
The water crisis also has a great socioeconomic burden on the people, which negatively impacts them, as the private business's water is very expensive. The people are forced to spend up to 10% of their income on water.
As Mexico City uses more and more,
Yeah, and then as you can see from this graph, a liter of bottled water in Mexico from these private businesses costs 3 pesos, whereas water pumped into our homes here in America, the same amount of it would cost half of a cent of a peso, which is an extremely less of a price here than it is in Mexico, proving how expensive the water is there.
As Mexico City uses more and more water, they must extend their pipes and find new water sources. However, this is drying up the sources farther away, and this leaves less water for the locals living in these areas. Not only does the water crisis affect the people, but also the environment.
With the greater Mexico City area having a population of 22 million people, the demand for water is very high there, resulting in Mexico City having to tap into multiple local sources of water in order to meet the demand. Now, since this population has been this big for so long, they've already dried up all the sources immediately nearby them, so they've had to extend large pipelines in order to find enough water to meet the demand for the people. And as Juliet said earlier, it has large effects on the locals that live near those water sources that Mexico City is now tapping into, and it also has effects on the ecosystem that the ecosystem usually depends on for that water.
Dams are currently being used to power these water pipes in Mexico. However, these dams have a great environmental and effects on the environment and effects on the people, as when these dams are being constructed, they can push full towns out of their homes, and they also destroy the ecosystems around them, as they can harm all of the trees, and they also affect the soil, which leads to increased risks of flooding.
The water crisis is bad financially for the citizens, but it is good for private businesses, as they make a large profit off of selling the bottled water.
The private businesses, unlike the people, benefit greatly from this problem, as Juliet said before. They make great profits from this water, which is greatly needed.
The government also has to spend a large amount of money on this water crisis, as they have to keep extending the pipelines in order to reach the water sources they need to meet the demand for the city, which costs a lot of money.
A possible solution for this water crisis is to build desalination plants along the coast of Mexico. This makes the water from the sea drinkable. This water would then be transported through pipes to homes of the people in Mexico City. This would make sure they would not have to pay as much for clean, drinkable water.
So desalination is the process of desalinating or taking away the salt from salt water. There are 2 methods of desalination: membrane separation and thermal distillation. However, thermal distillation is much more energy efficient and therefore be more beneficial for Mexico. Thermal distillation consists of the salt water being put through a semi-permeable membrane, and when the water comes out, it's fresh water. After this, the water is then filtered so that it is able to be drank for the people. This water is then transported to the people's houses through pipes. However, desalination is not a new concept in Mexico. It is, as you can see on the map, where the circle is, many desalination plants are there, and they've been constructed by the government and private businesses. However, in this area, there is no need for water. So these desalination plants have been failing terribly as they do not get the funding that they need because there is no need for water. In addition, because they're in a place where they don't need water, they're just there for no reason.
And that consists of one water desalination plant, which that would cost alone around 15 billion pesos. And then the pipeline extending from that plant to the ocean would cost around 682 million pesos. Even though it sounds expensive, it would be feasible because of the different ways we would pay for it.
All this will be paid for by raising taxes. Currently, taxes are 5% to 30% of income, and only about 1/3 of citizens in Mexico pay taxes, as you can see on the chart. Using these numbers, we found that taxes would have to be raised 0.25% over 5 years. After the 5 years, we would decrease the raise to 0.1% to run the plants and facilities. We would also use tariffs that are placed on the desalination plants currently to pay for any other expenses.
The solution will help the people immensely, as now the clean water is coming to their tap for a cheaper price than the bottled water. There is no need for the people to spend for money on the bottled water, and there are no need for the pipes to be extended to the natives' water sources as well.
This would help the economy because the government wouldn't have to extend the pipes, as this costs a lot of money. And also, the businesses that sell bottled water currently would suffer, and people would lose jobs from these businesses failing, but there would be a lot more job opportunity as well because of building the pipelines and facilities as well as maintaining these pipelines and facilities.
Our solution would also benefit the environment, as Mexico City would no longer be drying up water sources, which would not harm the ecosystems and would not impact the natives that usually live there and depend on that water. And even though that the pipeline going to the ocean would harm the wildlife in the ocean a little bit, it would have less of an impact as the drying up the water sources on land did. So in conclusion, many problems are caused by the Mexican tap water, which affect the people, environment, and economy in multiple negative ways. And we can solve this problem through desalination, through building a pipeline to the ocean, so we can provide the Mexican people with less expensive, clean water pumped into their homes, and it would have less of a negative effect on the ecosystems of Mexico.
The topic we researched for this project was offshore oil drilling in Brazil. The production of offshore oil drilling has increased in many countries in recent years. The process of extracting oil is complex and presents multiple risks that can negatively affect the environment, making it a controversial topic. Although it is disputed because of its many difficulties, it is an optimal business for Brazil to increase their oil exports and revenue.
Offshore oil drilling uses 3 main types of rigs. One such rig is the jackup rig, which is used in water depths of up to 400 feet. The tubular structured legs are lowered to the seafloor, which allows the hull to remain above the surface of water. Another type of rig is a platform rig, which is self-contained and placed on fixed platforms for field development drilling. Once the drilling is over, the rig is removed from the platform. The third main type of oil rig is the semi-submersible. They work while half submerged in water and can drill up to depths of 10,000 feet.
The last piece of technology Brazil uses to extract oil are drill ships. These ships are self-propelled ships that are capable of drilling in ultra-deep waters of up to 12,000 feet. All rigs are capable of being transported under their own power, or all drill ships are capable of being transported under their own power. The most common example of transportation are tugboats moving jackup rigs and semi-submersible rigs. Semi-submersible rigs usually remain in the water during this process.
The importing in the oil drilling process commonly includes FPSOs, or floating production storage and offloading vessels. FPSOs are vessels that include processing equipment for the raw materials extracted on the deck and provide storage for the oil in the hull below the deck. Once this process is complete, FPSOs offload the oil or gas into shuttle tankers. In the diagram here, it shows how the FPSO is anchored down into the sea floor and the production line is drilling oil and transferring it back up to the boat. The oil then goes to the process facility to be processed and cleaned, where it is then sent down to the hull of the boat to be stored or until it is shipped off into shuttle tankers.
To import the oil extracted, it is taken from the FPSOs to shuttle tankers, which ship the oil back to Brazil. Then the processed petroleum is put through pipelines to be transported.
Although offshore oil drilling has resulted in a large profit for Brazil, there has been proven to be many problems with this process. One of our main problems is the pollution that is caused in the ocean. For example, in 2010, a largely known company in Brazil, Petrobras, acknowledged having 57 oil leaks, with a total of 4,201 barrels of oil leaked into the water. Not only was this incident devastating for the environment, but also resulted in a loss of over $220,000 for the company. It is also important that oil rigs are technologically up to date because a single oil rig can dump more than 90,000 metric tons of drilling fluid and metal cuttings into the ocean. Currently, Brazil has about 70 oil rigs that, if broken, could dump pollutants and harmful toxic metals such as lead, chromium, mercury, and other potent carcinogens.
Another problem with the offshore oil drilling is its expensive cost in addition to Brazil's economic situation. Drilling a single well can cost anywhere between $200 and $300 million, a large economic expense for any country. This is especially a problem for Brazil because they are already facing debt from hosting the FIFA World Cup and the Summer Olympics.
A large problem has always been with the failure of resource transportation. The failure has been said to be due to poor placement of safety critical paths, component failures without sufficient backup, and poor control of the emergency notification system layout. Because of these problems, Brazil is hesitant to completely invest in the process, but the United States has invested in it and has led them to be the top producers of oil. The United States has been in this industry for 11 years and now produce approximately 1.5 million barrels of oil per day. With simple and affordable solutions, offshore oil drilling could be a successful and viable option for Brazil.
There are multiple solutions that Brazil can implement to ensure the stability of their offshore oil drilling industry. The first is for the government to invest money into the resource transportation mechanical design flaws in order to prevent future accidents from occurring and decrease the amount of pollutants that enter the ocean. These rigs need to be properly set up so all important systems are functioning at peak efficiency. The main components that need to be restructured include the placement of key safety critical paths, well-working backup systems in case of component failures, and redesign of emergency notification systems, all of which are current technological issues today and the most common reason for rig accidents. Brazil needs to update the rigs to better fit their needs in the deep water oil production, which can be done with spar platforms.
Spar platforms are platforms that have large cylinders which stabilize the drilling and allows for fast production of oil in deep waters. These platforms will cost around $3 billion, but with the quick extraction rate, the income will exceed the price of investment, making this a good option for Brazil.
A solution which would be helpful to the process is sturdier wells and stronger cement sealing used to keep the underwater pipes in place. The cement needs to be tested for the pressures, and additionally, the wells should have blowout preventers since they are capable of withstanding 20,000 pounds per square inch of pressure and help to decrease the pressure on the rig to stop explosions. The blowout preventers will cost at least $500,000 each. The company, British Petroleum, is working on something called the 20K project for safer and more reliable deep water oil reservoirs. The 20K project aims to make designs that can withstand 20,000 pounds per square inch of pressure and is supposed to recover 10 to 20 billion barrels of oil, which is equal to approximately $470 to $940 billion.
The designs and models have not yet been created, but it is a viable option for Brazil to further their development in the future. The products from BP oil could increase Brazil's process and revenue effectively while also maintaining the environment. Now, assuming that all changes would be made this year, the total cost for all these implementations is projected to be about $13.5 billion, while the revenue of offshore oil drilling in 2015 is only $4 billion. However, we predict that by 2020, the expenditure and revenue will be equal, and starting in 2021, the revenue will begin to surpass the expenditure.
In the 2000s, there was a significant increase in oil spills, with up to 10 major oil spills that year. Already from 2010 to 2015, there have been 2 major spills. These solutions could save Brazil environmentally by reducing these numbers to only 2 major spills in the 2020s and potentially only 1 in the 2030s.
To conclude, offshore oil drilling in Brazil could benefit their economy and trade, changing the country for the better. If Brazil were to start drilling oil more faster, and they could become very successful as an economic world power, especially in offshore oil drilling industry. By preventing oil spills, strengthening the oil wells, and diminishing flaws in resource transportation technologies, these solutions will be environmentally friendly as well as beneficial to Brazil in the near future. The business of oil drilling in Brazil would ultimately benefit their country.
Hello, we're going to talk about coal in Russia and the problems that are associated with it.
Russia is one of the largest consumers of coal, but also one of its largest producers. Russia's coal industry includes many complex steps with numerous problems that are affecting the country. Renovating each major step will allow the process to be more efficient, creating a prosperous economy and environment.
So first up in the coal production process is finding the coal. And in order to do this, scientists use specific maps of the country to locate the possible areas where the coal might be found. Then workers start something called an exploration digging, which is when they go in and they dig up the ground to see whether or not the coal is high quality and if there's enough of it to start a coal mine. If there is, then the area becomes a mine. If not, then the ground is just covered back up with the dirt that was dug up in the beginning.
Then, this refined coal goes through turbines to generate electricity.
Now, there are many problems associated with the production of coal, but the one we're going to focus on is pollution, and specifically air pollution.
So in order to make this electricity, the coal is converted in large power plants that can harm the people and the environment due to their atmospheric pollution. They release a substance known as fine particulate matter, which is extremely dangerous to human health. The use of coal in specific areas in Russia increased the bronchitis rate by 15%, asthma rate by 35%, and cancer risk by 30%, as well as lowered the life expectancy by 2 to 3 years. Similarly to this picture, having to go around like this is something we are not used to here. This air pollution problem not only has its effects on their internal health, but also their everyday life.
Another problem associated with the production of coal is the amount of methane that's released into the air. As you can see by this graph, the deeper that they dig into each coal mine, the more methane that's released. This is a problem because they dig a lot of tons of coal. They just don't get 1 ton of coal and then call it a day. And the problem this has is that, as you can see by the chart down there, 1 pound of methane does the equivalent of 21 pounds of carbon dioxide. That's really bad because that's the effect that it has on the ozone layer. And the ozone layer is what protects us from the sun's harmful UV rays, which can cause skin cancer.
There is so much pollution that damages the environment from extracting coal. Mining coal leads to water pollution because the dust and chemicals from the coal mines end up flowing into rivers and streams. Mining coal also leads to air pollution because in order to start a coal mine, workers often have to blast open the ground so the dust and chemicals is released into the air. Mining coal also creates land disturbance because when an area is cleared for coal mining and the coal is fully extracted, there is no treatment done to the land to help the environment. Over 120 square miles have been cleared for mining coal in 2010, and between 1.5 billion and 2 billion cubic meters of methane is released into the atmosphere from coal mines.
However, there is a way to gradually fix, or at least improve, the air pollution problem in Russia.
The Wirchin 2200 surface miner is a coal mining machine that can mine coal from surface mines. And since over half of Russia's coal mines are on the surface, this fixes most of their environmental problems. This machine can produce 25% more coal than traditional mining methods, and it consumes 15% less fuel than other processes for the same cost that coal is produced today. Also, the Wirchin is gentle on the environment because it doesn't make any vibrations, so there is no noise pollution or land disturbance, and there are very low levels of dust during the mining process. Additionally, the cost of coal production process is less with this machine because it crushes up the coal into small pieces, so no one has to go back in and put the coal through crushing equipment. And since the coal is already in a small size, it takes a fewer number of trucks to transport the coal. As you can see on this graph here, it takes 526,000 trucks to transport 10 million tons of coal without the use of the Wirchin 2200 surface miner. But with the machine, it only takes 500,000 trucks to transport the same amount of coal. The Wirchin machine requires a fewer number of trucks, less fuel to operate, it doesn't take much maintenance, and it helps the environment, all the while producing the same amount of coal that traditional mining methods do today.
A major way to reduce the CO2 emissions emitted from coal-fired power plants is to implement a system known as carbon capture and storage systems, or CCS. This process can capture up to 90% of the carbon dioxide that is emitted from these plants. This video gives a very simplistic overview of the process. That is why we chose it.
Most of these emissions come from power plants, heavy industry, and refineries, the largest emitters of CO2. CCS can capture at least 90% of these CO2 emissions before it's transported in liquid form by pipeline or ship and stored safely and permanently far below the Earth's surface. This process simply imitates how nature has stored oil, gas, and CO2 for millions of years.
So as you can see from the video, the basic process is to take this coal emitted and put it back into the ground, which means it is very environmentally friendly. As you can see from this graph, in 2011, coal burning produced 14.4 billion tons of CO2 emissions. Since CCS reduces 90% of these emissions, there would only be 12.96 billion tons. Even though this seems like a lot, every ton counts. However, to get the most out of these systems, the plants should be fairly young and have a large generating capacity. Since many of Russia's plants use fairly old equipment and are relatively small, it will be more efficient to build new, modernized factories such as these with this already installed.
Another solution to solve the methane that's being released into the air is a device called a methane digester. This diagram here shows it with a landfill, but can also occur with a coal mine. So what the methane digester does, it takes the methane out of the ground before it goes into the air, and then it puts it through a methane to electricity conversion facility, so then it can be used for electricity. Now this is not only helpful for the environment, but it's also more cost effective. The total cost of electricity would be about $2 trillion for all of Russia. If they were to rely solely on methane, it would only cost $75 billion. This decreases the cost by 375%. I got those numbers because that's a big number, and you're probably wondering where I got it. The cost of electricity per kilowatt hour is approximately $1.77, and the cost of methane per kilowatt hour is only 60 cents. Here's a more visual representation of what 375% decrease would look like.
So overall, in order for Russia to fully benefit from its natural resources, they should have the right technologies. By implementing new infrastructure, such as the carbon capture and storage systems,
surface miner,
and the methane digester.
Russia can minimize many of the problems resulting from the air pollution in order to create a successful economy and a clean environment. Thank you.
Hi. What you see here in front of you is not an ordinary collection of items. You probably are familiar with most of these. For example, this phone. We use our phones all the time for just about everything. And this laptop. Everyone at STEM has their very own MacBook. Now, what do these seemingly unfamiliar items all have in common? They were all made with oil. Now, these are just a few of over 6,000 everyday items that contain oil. Oil is important, and it's a resource that we should pay attention to. However, would it surprise you if one of the world's leading producers in oil is struggling to maintain its production efficiency? It's Russia. Russia's oil industry has caused both environmental and economic impacts over the years. But today, we bring you a stunning solution that will both boost Russia's economy and save its precious environment.
Now we would like to talk a little on the background about the Russian oil industry. So first we'd like to talk about the drilling locations of Russia, and there are many different locations within Russia where they drill oil, and we'd like to talk about a couple key ones. So first, in the center of Russia is Western Siberia, where they drill about 2/3 of their annual oil from. So they're heavily reliant on this area. A little to the west of Western Siberia is the Urals-Volga region, where the second most amount of oil is drilled each year. So it used to be their #1 producer. However, production has slowed down and the amount of oil produced has slowed down. And then north of Western Siberia is the Yamal Peninsula region, where there are large reserves of oil. However, Russia is facing issues with utilizing this oil because of transportation constraints. Next, I would like to talk about the refineries within Russia. Refineries for oil will cleanse the crude oil of impurities to allow it to be a usable product. However, Russian refineries are very inefficient and do not produce a very high-quality product. This is due to the fact that their refineries are very old and originating from the Soviet era. The average efficiency rate in Russia is only about 72%, while in Europe it is 85%, and in the US it is a whopping 90%. So there's a large room for improvement here.
This is a large issue for Russia because they are very dependent on their oil revenue. Russia earns over $180 billion every year off the global oil trade, and crude oil makes up almost half of all of their exports. It's no surprise the government placed a large amount of taxes on this industry. Back in 2004, taxes were as high as 20%. But it has done nothing but increase, as taxes have been raised as high as 90% on some oil company and oil drilling and refinery companies. This is very good for the Russian economy and government for all this revenue coming in, but there's an issue that arises about being this dependent on that oil revenue. It's been reported that Russia loses about $2 billion for every dollar decrease in the price of a barrel of oil. $2 billion. That is a lot. Therefore, the prices drop at all today. It would result in a large revenue loss for the Russian government. Another issue that arises in being too dependent on oil is that most of Russia's welfare programs are funded with oil revenue. Almost half of the Russian government's state budget is made up of oil revenue. Therefore, if this oil revenue were to drop through the taxes, it would result in a smaller state budget and the cut of welfare programs such as subsidies and pensions for citizens who rely heavily on them. These citizens would be thrust into deeper poverty, and the government would have to spend more of its resources on helping these citizens rather than progressing its own economy. However, these issues can be avoided as long as the price of oil can be kept static by increasing Russian oil efficiency.
Now, on the other hand, it has become apparent over the years that many of Russia's environmental problems have been leading back to its oil industry. Why? Russia spills over 30 million barrels of oil every year over the land and into the water. Now, This is a problem because when oil spills into the water and over the land, it can cause destruction in plant life, as well as a decline in animal populations such as fish, whales, and reindeer. Now, the problem stretches far past just wildlife, however, as Russia has been suffering hits to other environmental factors. For example, when Russia needs to create new oil sites and refineries, new roads have to be paved and new areas have to be cleared. This causes both deforestation and erosion, two factors that harm the environment. And also, when Russia's oil leaks into the water, it makes it unsafe for citizens to both use and consume. So when developing a solution to this problem, we need to remember to keep Russia's environment both safe and healthy.
In light of these issues, we have developed a solution that will not only boost the Russian economy and prevent a socioeconomic crisis, but will also keep oil out of the precious Russian environment. So first, to address the issue of inefficiencies in the Russian oil refineries, we suggest instituting 30 state-of-the-art cracking units into the refinery system. These cracking units will increase the speed of the process and create an overall more smooth and efficient process overall. The average efficiency rate of the Russian oil refineries will jump from 72% to 85%, equaling Europe's. This translates into a higher quality product along with an additional 26 million tons of oil added to annual production. To put that into perspective, that would weigh as much as 5 pyramids of Giza worth of oil. Now you may be thinking, this is a very costly process, and that is true. It'll cost about $22 billion to implement these systems. However, within 5 years, Russia will be able to start making a profit. And when considering how vast the oil industry is, there's actually a very small wait time. And this is even more true when considering that the demand for oil is projected to rise by at least 3% each year. So after this 5-year wait period, Russia will start making a profit of about $2.875 billion each year from this cracking solution alone.
The second part of our solution addresses Russia's inefficiency with their oil pipelines. Russia loses almost 1/5 of their total oil production every year among the thousands of miles of poorly maintained and poorly monitored pipelines. To help fix this issue, we have found 3 technology systems that can be used to improve or decrease the rate of Russian oil spills. The first technology found is known as Smart Pipe, or a Norwegian system that was made to monitor certain variables within pipelines such as temperature, pressure, and tension, all of which can lead to pipeline bursts. The second system we found is known as Digital Globe Worldview 2, a system that uses satellite technology to constantly monitor pipelines for oil thefts and or leakages. These two systems, when combined, is a very effective duo as Smart Pipe monitors from the inside, while Digital Globe Worldview 2 monitors from the outside. Finally, the third system we found is known as AOT version 1.2, an American-developed system that has the intent to increase oil flow rate, but decrease the amount of energy actually put into the pipelines. This system, when tested by the United States Department of Energy, received very proficient scores and has been determined to be a crucial part in decreasing the amount of energy put into pipelines. We believe that these 3 systems, when combined together, will result in less oil spills for Russia every year. There's only one slight concern that we have for these systems, is that they don't actually have a market price as of now. Digital Globe Worldview 2 has been in orbit since 2009, but there hasn't been a set market price for their services. Also, AOT version 1.2 and Smart Pipe are still in late global testing stages, not on the market as of now. So you may be asking, how do you know that these will be successful if they don't even have a market price? And also, due to this not having a market price, there's not enough adequate data to prove any oil spill reduction rate. And again, you may be asking, how do you know this will be successful if you don't even have an oil spill reduction rate? But we know it will be successful because if all of these 3 systems can combine to decrease Russia's oil spill rate by 10%, it will result in 3 million barrels of oil from being spilled in the environment every single year, which would also result in $180 million more going to the Russian economy. That's why we believe that when these 3 pipeline systems are implemented into Russia, along with the catalytic units that Vineeth talked about, that's why we believe that these 3 systems will be a powerful solution to Russia's inefficiency with their oil.
So you guys might think, so what? Well, you don't know just how much this solution could be helping the world, both environmentally and economically.
First, we will be increasing the amount of oil produced in the world by 500,000 barrels per day. That's over 200 Olympic-sized swimming pools worth of oil every single day. Now, if that wasn't enough, can we tell you that we will be saving millions of barrels of oil from spilling into Russia's environment every year? That translates to both a cleaner Russian environment and more revenue flowing into the economy. So that is why we believe that this solution will help ensure that Russia stays as the leading producer of the world's most valuable resource. So, Russia, if you're listening, we hope you're picking up where we're putting down. Thank you.
I'm Joanna. This is Sid, Will, and Tabitha, and we researched wind in Iceland. Iceland is highly reliant on geothermal energy to sustain their country, but the negative impacts of this source pollutes both the land and the air. Now, due to Iceland's very windy climate, wind power can be harnessed to replace the use of geothermal energy in a more beneficial way to Iceland's economy and environment.
So what exactly is wind energy and geothermal energy? Geothermal energy can be described as heat that comes from the earth. It works by pushing cold water into hot, dry, arid rocks deep under the earth's surface, typically 3 to 5 miles under. Now, this water is then produced naturally to steam and then comes up to be converted into electricity. Iceland consumes about 84% of primary energy, which of that primary energy is energy that's found in wild, energy that's found in nature that has not been tampered with or altered with by humans. About 65% of that primary energy is geothermal energy. That's a huge population of Iceland that runs on geothermal energy. Now, in 2008, Iceland went into a huge financial crisis, as did the rest of the world, and both of their major banks collapsed. Although this was nearly 7 years ago, they're still on their final strides to recovery today, and we believe that the implementation of wind instead of geothermal energy will speed up this process. Now, wind energy harnesses Earth's natural resource of wind and converts it into usable electricity. There are typically 3 types of wind energy: utility, distributed or small wind, and offshore wind. Utility wind power is industrial, the stuff you see driving on the highways. Distributed or small wind is smaller than utility and typically for commercial or residential use. And offshore wind sort of encompasses the both of them and is typically not on site, usually in nearby oceans or seas or in different countries. Now, these wind turbines support both a hub that secures these blades and the nacelle, which houses the turbine's shaft, gearbox, generator, and controls. These wind turbines in Iceland can be up to 100% more efficient than the rest of those in Europe. Now, the EU has this 20-20-20 policy which basically means as long as you have a 20% reduction in primary energy use compared with your projected energy levels, 20% of your 20% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and 20% of your energy consumption comes from renewable resources, it allows for more foreign investment and better income. And we believe we can meet these standards to increase economic productivity.
All right, so let's talk about environmental. So both wind and geothermal affect the environment in negative ways. However, the environmental impact of geothermal energy is worse. So geothermal releases gases such as hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and methane. Also, the digging can cause disturbances underground, which result in earthquakes. As you can see in the table now, it shows the CO2 and sulfur output of a geothermal plant. It's about 96 grams per kilowatt an hour of energy. Now, if you notice the arrow I put on the table, that shows where wind would be, and wind releases 0 greenhouse gases. So while we're on the subject of wind, let's talk about the environmental impact of wind. So the only bad part about wind, it's noisy, it can kill birds, and it's unappealing. However, due to Iceland's low population, all these can be avoided by placing the wind turbines away from the population and in areas that are not populated that well. Wind is free, there are no fuel costs, and no greenhouse gases, so you can help the world out there. That's one of my favorite cartoon pictures I found on the internet, and I think it's funny. So let's talk about the most interesting topic, economics. Oh boy. So we looked at installation costs, and we looked at how much would it cost to power all the households in Iceland with geothermal energy. What about wind energy? So when we researched, we found that geothermal energy is way more expensive. However, when we continued to research, we found that it produces more energy. However, it is way more expensive than wind. So although geothermal produces more energy, it is still more expensive than wind energy. So let's get into the numbers. So a 3 megawatt power plant produces about 26,280,000 kilowatts a year. And an average house uses about 11,500, meaning it provides for 2,285 households. And if there's 125,681 households, that means to power all the houses in Iceland, you're going to need 55 3 megawatt power plants. And if each one costs about $10,200,000, that means you're going to have a total cost of $561 million. Now let's talk about wind. So a 3 megawatt wind turbine produces about 17,520,000 kilowatts a year. That means it can provide for 1,523 and a half households. Which means you are going to need 82 and a half 3 megawatt wind turbines to power all the households in Iceland. But they only cost about $3 million each, which brings your total cost to $247.5 million, which is significantly less than geothermal. And that brings us to a profit from switching from geothermal to wind to $313.5 million.
So with the profit we obtain from switching from geothermal energy to wind energy, we plan to reinvest it in Iceland with anti-erosion methods. Our first method would be a field shelter belt. Shelter belts are rows of shrubs and trees that can deflect wind for up to 10 times the height of the tallest tree. We plan to plant these trees right around the highly eroded areas in order to lessen the amount of wind erosion. From our research, we can see that the Norway is the best evergreen tree to plant at $690 for 1,000 saplings. We see that the bur oak is the best medium tree to plant at $580 for 1,000 saplings, and that the sugar maple is the best tallest tree to plant at about $650 for 1,000 saplings. We also plan to give back to the community and educate them on how we can help lessen the erosion in Iceland. First, we will tell them how to maintain a vegetation cover and also reduce or eliminate tillage. They can also help by planting and maintaining the field shelter belts that we originally implement.
Overall, we can conclude that switching Iceland's energy to wind energy will ultimately help their economy and their environment.
Thank you.
When most of the world thinks of Japan, they will most likely think of fish and sushi, which have been long trademarks of Japan. In order to help advance Japan's economy by utilizing their naturally occurring resources, the problems within the fishing industry must be addressed and resolved without significantly damaging the environment. This is a graph of the number of fisheries in Japan from 1970 to 1995. As you can see, the number of fisheries in 1970 were at 550,000, and then they decreased to 193,000 in 1995, which is over the course of 25 years. Illustrating their struggle with this industry, the decrease in fisheries means that instead of the necessary and preferred growth within the industry, it was shrinking.
Throughout the history of Japan, fish were and still are a main part of their culture and economy. They hold significant meaning to the people and are the #1 natural resource of the country, resulting in the biggest impact economically out of all the resources. Japan heavily depends on fish as their main natural resource. Because other resources such as magnesium and gold are so minuscule that most of the cost of retrieving is greater than their worth, so the need to increase the industry's worth and accessibility is constantly growing.
The entire agricultural sector accounts for 1.2% of their economy. 1.2% might not seem like a major part of their economy, but their total net worth and the national wealth was 3,000 trillion yen at the end of 2012. 3,000 trillion yen is equivalent to 25 trillion US dollars, and 1.2% of 25 trillion US dollars is 300 billion. By increasing the productivity of the market, Japan is looking at a possible $1 billion increase.
So although Japan has a generally rapidly growing economy, the issues within their fish industry has caused the stifling of their economic advancement. One of these issues includes biodiversity, which can be defined as a lack of variety in the types of fishing that the Japanese are doing. And this lack of biodiversity is caused by overfishing, which is another problem. And between these two factors, the aquatic ecosystems of Japan have issues thriving.
At one point, the fish farming and forestry industries employed 48.5% of Japanese citizens. This percentage has been decreasing over the past few years. The implementation of our solution will hopefully boost these statistics and lead to an increase of jobs within Japan's agricultural sector.
Artificial insemination is the collection of spermatozoa and ova and their mixing in various media. This solution is used to increase the population of fish, especially in freshwater areas, since freshwater causes spermatozoa to deteriorate. However, artificial insemination can occasionally be successful, but very temperamental with high labor costs and capital.
Another way to improve a fish industry is to ensure proper inclusion and cooperation with supplier roundtables. A supplier roundtable is a coordination body that maximizes efficiency of improvement efforts through identifying common needs of different fisheries of a specific geographical area. Although this seems like a solution, there are common problems which include atrocious management of total allowable catches and skyrocketing fish mortality rates. The only way that supplier roundtables would bring a great deal of change would be if every single fishery in Japan participated, and that would be extremely hard to manage.
Based on the geography and fish industry of Japan, the most efficient approach to improve their fishing industry is trawling. It is true trawling has negative effects when used in areas densely populated with coral reefs. However, northern Japan has mostly clear waters, so this would not be a major concern.
So the final plausible solution is converting many, if not all, of Japan's fisheries to deep-sea trawling. Deep-sea trawling can be defined as the high-intensity raking of the seabed. This model will show how it works. See, trawling is how you take a large net and scrape it along the bottom of the seafloor. It collects many fish instead of just one at a time. If you were trying to get fish with a hook, it would be much harder and much more time-consuming. Trawling is also beneficial to the fish populations as it decreases the competition between the predators and prey of the fish that Japan is actually interested in obtaining. This is called the ecological cultivation effect.
Though artificial insemination seems like a uniquely specific way to improve upon fish populations, it focuses mostly on the fish in freshwater regions. And Japan's main fishing industries are located around the oceans surrounding the country. On the other hand, supplier roundtables
can be increasingly helpful in the improvement of a specific area's fishing industry, but without the many individual supplier roundtables taking action all over Japan, the effects would be undetectable.
There would be regulations put into place prohibiting trawling in the select areas where there are coral reefs, like the coast of Japan. The main areas being fished in Japan do not have much coral and are safe, so trawling would not do significant damage to the area, resulting in a quick, productive method of obtaining the fish that is so important to the Japanese economy. Throughout the cost of trawling implementation would be generally based on the boat's fuel consumption. The boats use about 32 gallons of fuel per hour, which is about $59. Trawling boats do use more fuel than regular fishing boats, but the price of fuel has gone down about 50% since the mid-2014. The cost is minuscule compared to the amount that the fishing industry earns.
So, in our opinion, if the fishing industry was improved, the economy would also prosper due to the increased revenue from fish sales, the increase of jobs created for the Japanese citizens, and the money saved from a relatively inexpensive process. After researching various fishing methods and solutions to these problems, we found that trawling would be the most beneficial for the Japanese and their society. So whether you're a sushi lover or an environmentalist, help us to implement trawling and make life better not only for the Japanese citizens, but for the little fish as well. Thank you.
Brazil is considered to be one of the most polluted countries in the world. The large amounts of pollution produced by iron mines in Brazil harm both the environment and its population. Although the government has tried to reduce pollution by implementing environmentally sensitive regulations, the environment can be improved further through environmentally sensitive processes like these green mining techniques.
Okay, so Brazil's iron mines produce a great amount of air pollution, and it's probably the biggest environmental problem caused by these mines. This is because these mines release great amounts of atmospheric emissions, like carbon dioxide, for example, which is considered a greenhouse gas. What causes these atmospheric emissions is at first, the ore is screened into different types of pellets, and then these pellets are fed into a furnace to be further refined. The machine in which these pellets are separated and this furnace are the main causes of these atmospheric emissions. And as a result of all this air pollution, there's a high infant mortality rate in industrial cities. In some industrial cities, 35% of babies die before they grow to be 1 year old. This great deal of deaths is caused by respiratory problems as many citizens live close to the industry. As a solution, we should implement flue gas treatment plants. Flue gas treatment plants substantially reduce atmospheric emissions. They store and solidify harmful gases rather than releasing them into the atmosphere. They do this by filtering through that bag filter in the red square, and then they collect this dust and put it in containment facilities where it can no longer harm the environment. As a result of implementing these flue gas treatment plants, the dust levels in the air would decrease, and subsequently so would the mortality rates due to the respiratory problems. Unfortunately, the cost for the installment of these flue gas treatment plants is in the range from $7 to $15 million. Therefore, these flue gas treatment plants should be installed in the largest industrial cities, like Carajás, for example, which is the largest iron mine in the world and is located in Brazil. This is because the larger iron mines tend to produce more air pollution than the smaller iron mines. Therefore, if Brazil were to implement these flue gas treatment plants in their largest iron mines, then they would lower the high mortality rates in some industrial cities due to respiratory problems.
Iron mines also produce a lot of water pollution in lakes, rivers, and other bodies of water. Mines currently use a process called saponification, which removes unwanted minerals using the chemical separation of ammonia from the material. This results in ammonia-infused water being released into the ecosystem. Mines also transport their iron in a substance known as slurry. Slurry is iron-filled and mineral-filled water that also gets dumped into the ecosystem. The dumping of slurry results in high levels of iron and aluminum in bodies of water, which is sometimes raised above the maximum level required to sustain life. For example, in the Maiba Lagoon, the levels of iron and aluminum at 2 different sites were measured, and the levels were found to be higher than the actual permitted safe level for aquatic life. To prevent this, mines could first claim the ammonia from the ammonia-infused water to reuse in future saponification. Secondly, mines can recycle the fresh water brought in for use, rather than dumping it. This will reduce the levels of iron and aluminum to a level safer for aquatic life.
Brazil's iron mines also produce a large amount of land pollution. It uses a form of mining called open pit mining, which adds to land pollution in the form of tailings. An open pit mine is basically a big hole in the ground, like the one picture you see there, approximately where the ore is. And in order to extract the ore, what the workers do is they take gigantic cranes and they rip out the ore from the side of the hole along with tons of rock and earth and soil. This rock and earth and soil, these are tailings. The tailings and the ore are then sent by truck to a treatment plant where they are chemically treated in order to separate, because the ore is what is valuable and the tailings are worthless. After the treatment, the tailings are sent to landfills and are dumped in large piles, much like the other picture, where they are exposed to wind and rain and they erode. As these piles erode, the toxic chemicals that they acquired during the treatment seep into the ground and pollute it. Our solution to this problem would be to build tailing containment facilities, which are basically big warehouses built in order to store the tailings. However, in our solution, before we send the tailings to the containment facilities, we would send them back to the plant to treat them again, as the current process is not efficient and often leaves ore in. By sending the tailings and the ore left in back to the treatment plant, we would increase yield and we would increase profits, which would then in turn help pay for the facilities.
Okay. Old and illegal mines also cause a great amount of the pollution found in Brazil. Old mines use primitive, environmentally insensitive technologies. For example, Cubatão, an industrial city, pictured there, houses the largest and oldest steel facilities in the world. Because of this, it is considered one of the most polluted cities on Earth, and has even been nicknamed the Valley of Death. Therefore, Brazil should replace old processes in cities like Cubatão with newer and more environmentally friendly technologies like the ones we previously mentioned. In addition, the government should spend more time finding and shutting down illegal mines. This is because illegal mines were built there unauthorized and tend to overmine the land. They also use improper mining practices that result in more land erosion and water pollution. We would use the profits gained from the previously mentioned processes to pay to hire more teams to search for and shut down these illegal mines. Although this would add an additional cost, the main focus of our plans is to improve Brazil's environment, as Brazil is already quite successful economically. So if Brazil were to implement more advanced processes in these old mines and shut down more illegal mines, then we would limit pollution done in the environment.
As Kat had mentioned previously, Brazil's economy is strong, and this is mostly due in part to its iron and steel industry, which is so important to Brazil that its economy is dependent on iron mining. Brazil is the world's second largest producer of iron and steel, and as you can see by this graph, it supplies 25% of China's iron imports, and this number is increasing annually due to China's growing workforce. Iron and steel is listed as one of Brazil's export commodities, which means that it is one of Brazil's most highly valued exports. Brazil also needs its iron and steel for itself, as its middle class is growing at a rate of 45% every year. Because of this demand for iron rising, Brazil needs to increase its yields of iron ore, and it can do so by using a process known as bioleaching.
Bioleaching is another green process that is sustainable, will reduce pollution, and increase profit and efficiency. Bioleaching uses microorganisms to naturally extract metals from an ore. The initial costs of bioleaching are about 50% of the initial costs for conventional methods. Although bioleaching does take longer and have higher operating costs, bioleaching allows mines to make more profit than conventional methods. For example, as you can see on the graph, Morenci is a conventional mine that makes much lower profit and has lower operating costs. Well, no, wait. Morenci has higher operating costs but lower profit than Kalahari, a bioleaching mine. The high revenue earned from bioleaching is due to the high recovery rate of 90%. The conventional methods only have a recovery rate of 79%. An increase in Brazilian mines' recovery rate would allow them to extract more iron and thus make more profit and become a better trading partner with China.
Brazil can improve its mines to be environmentally sensitive by adding these green mining processes. These new processes will lower pollution levels as well as lowering costs. Because these processes are environmentally safe and yet relatively inexpensive, as well as increase yield, efficiency will improve if our demands are implemented. Thank you.